You don't just lose your way in the warp. You lose time. You lose the shape of reality. The Cathedral of Iron should have reached Cadia in 3 weeks. Instead, the crew watched each other age and vanish while corridors folded into impossible angles. When we clawed back into real space, 900 years had passed. Sun never left. This is what it means to be lost, not the way a child wanders from a crowd, or a soldier becomes separated in smoke. I mean the kind of losing that unravels the self, where direction becomes a joke told by something that no longer remembers how to laugh. I am Navigator Voss, and my chronometer says I served aboard the Cathedral of Iron for 6 months. My bones remember longer. I record this not because I expect anyone to hear it, but because making words makes me feel human. The Cathedral was a dictator-class cruiser, 3 kilometers of consecrated steel, machine spirits tended to by the Adeptus Mechanicus. She carried 12,000 souls, not counting servitors. Our mission was routine by Imperial standards. Move reinforcements and materiel to the Cadian Gate, a run along warp lanes I had plotted many times. I had been aboard for 8 years. I knew her moods, how her hull sang in the immaterial, the small, particular strain of unreality that clung to her when we translated. Captain Tovan Helix was a man of exacting faith and military order. He commanded respect and the kind of obedience that feels like family. We entered the warp on schedule. Geller Field stable, plasma drives singing their steady hymns. I settled into my navigation blister, a crystalline sphere jutting from the yachting spine of the ship, and opened my eye to the currents. At first, everything was familiar. The cathedral rode the warp like a blade through water, our reality bubble holding the nightmares at bay. 3 days in, something shifted. Our chronometers would later disagree about how long it truly lasted, but the change was subtle, a difference. In current, like the air before a storm, the warp around us stopped flowing past our bubble and began to curl, to taste us. I have navigated the Immaterium for 30 years. I can tell normal turbulence from attention. I reported it immediately. Captain Helix arrived at my blister with the calm of a man trained to swallow uncertainty. I chose my words carefully. Navigators do not speak lightly. He asked if I could correct our course. I said I would try, and that the warp was not responding as it should. He answered with faith and order. Proceed with faith. The Emperor protects. I turned back to my charts and worked. For 6 hours I thought we had succeeded. The feeling of being watched faded. Then the divergence struck. There is no adequate language for what happens when a ship loses its navigational lock in the Immaterium. In real space, you can drift, but still measure position by stars. In the warp, there is no up or down, no fixed point. Thought and feeling have weight. The laws of physics become suggestions. When a vessel goes off the map entirely, it does not simply sail off course. It slips into regions no navigator has returned from to tell us what lies there. I felt it like a hook in my third eye, yanking us sideways through a dimension that should not have a side. The cathedral shuddered conceptually, as if her identity wavered. Alarms screamed. The Geller field flickered, an instant long enough for those with sensitive souls to sense something pressing against the hull. Captain Helix ordered battle stations, a correct impulse, but useless for this. You cannot shoot your way out of being lost. I worked the charts frantically. The currents curled into malicious geometry. The warp became a vast, screaming expanse. It was as if every map we trusted had folded up and vanished. Navigator Voss. Report, the captain said over the Vox, voice tight. We've diverged from all known routes, I answered. My voice sounded hollow to me. I cannot find our position. The warp here does not match any recorded topology. A pause, then measured words. Can you bring us back? I don't know where back is, I said. I don't even. Know where here is? What else could he say? We held course and trusted the Emperor's guidance. We continued to monitor. The hours that followed taught me the true meaning of dread, not immediate fear, but the slow realization that there are no good outcomes. The cathedral drifted like a ghost ship, engines burning with nowhere to aim. Servitors kept their routines. The human crew kept theirs, but eyes grew hollow and hands trembled not by the 10th day. Or by the 10th day, our clocks claimed, temporal anomalies began to appear. A tech priest performed maintenance for what he felt were 6 hours only, to find 3 minutes had passed. A servitor walked a corridor that subjectively took hours for one observer, while another saw normal movement. 2 armsmen argued about a fight that, depending on whose memory you asked, had lasted seconds or hours. At my blister, I would chart a correction and find I had been staring at the same calculations for what my body insisted were days, while the chronometer read minutes. Other times my thoughts raced ahead of my hand, finishing notations before I moved. The warp wasn't only around us anymore. It was bleeding in, altering causality inside our reality bubble. Captain Helix convened senior officers in the stratagem. I attended via hololith, unwilling to leave my station. They were ragged, uniforms disordered, faces hollow. The captain spoke with the same careful cadence he kept in battle reports. "We have been in the warp 10 days, he began, and officers exchanged looks that suggested their experience disagreed with that time frame. Navigator Voss has been unable to locate a route back to real space. Our Geller field remains stable. We are experiencing temporal displacement. It's known in uncharted warp regions. Unsettling, but not immediately lethal. Maintain discipline. Report any unusual experiences. We were told to hold faith and duty. We did what duty demanded. But the ship and the crew continued to show the warp's quiet, patient changes, the slow, corrosive unmooring of time itself. The Geller field and ship systems were put under increased vigilance. Navigator Voss would continue to search for a route home. It was a steady speech, calm, confident, exactly what the crew needed to hear. It was also a necessary fiction. The captain did not say we had no reliable way out, that the temporal anomalies would almost certainly worsen, or that the longer we lingered, the more the warp would seep into the ship's reality. After the assembly, the captain contacted me privately. "Tell me the truth, Navigator. What is our situation?" I looked at him through the hololith, the same man who had kept his crew alive through void engagements and boarding actions. I told him what I believed. We were drifting in a part of the warp that should not exist, or perhaps only existed because we were there to observe it. The warp was not passive. It was responding to us, maybe even shaping itself around our presence. Temporal distortions would worsen. Days could collapse into minutes, decades into hours, or the reverse. Subjective time would diverge until communication became impossible. A man might age what felt like decades while his chronometer recorded. A single day or a single second might stretch into an eternity. The captain's face held its usual composure, but I saw his hands clench. "The Geller field is holding," I said. "But it was built to maintain local real space physics inside the bubble. If time itself becomes unstable, the field can't simply reassert normalcy. We may be shielded from direct incursion, but vulnerable to chronological dissolution." "Speak plainly," he said. "You may die of age in minutes," I answered. "You may be trapped in a moment that means nothing. Or we may simply cease to resolve in any meaningful sense. Our molecules, scattered across temporal angles we cannot perceive." He nodded as if I had only confirmed a dread he already carried. "Then we pray and we work. Find me a way home, Navigator Voss. That is an order." I wanted to tell him that some things lie beyond orders, beyond duty, beyond faith. I only nodded and returned to the warp. Days continued, or repeated in variations, like a tune on an instrument that had forgotten its tuning. I charted the nothing around us and tried to find patterns. Currents flowed backward. Eddies of calm appeared in the screaming void. Once I thought I saw something vast moving in the distance, a shape so slow it barely registered. When I focused my third eye on it, the chaos returned. The crew began to fracture, not in discipline. Captain Helix held that with iron will, but in shared reality. Work groups reported completing the same task and remembered it happening in different orders, with different people present. A meal in the galley was breakfast to some, dinner to others. Their chronometers verified both memories from their subjective frames. Shifts that felt like moments to one were eternities to another. Stories rose from every deck. An engine seer swore he had worked for 3 months without pause, maintaining plasma drives to an exhaustion that should have killed him, only to find 5 hours had passed and his body showed no sign of that ordeal. A squad of guards on watch insisted they had stood their post for decades in their minds, watching companions grow old while chronometers registered only hours. A young raiding came to the chapel and told the priest she had lived a lifetime between. 2 heartbeats, married, raised children, died, and then returned to the corridor where she had been walking. The priest gave her the Emperor's blessing and lighter duties. But part of her was no longer entirely present. We maintained ritual and routine because that is what duty demands. The captain broadcast daily prayers across the ship's Vox. The crew answered, but the conviction thinned. You can only name the same plea so many times before the words begin to hollow. I worked without rest, or perhaps without a reliable sense of rest at all. Time had become so subjective, I could not trust my own experience. I charted and recharted, looking for a thinning, a weakness in the immaterium that might lead back to real space. I found nothing useful, or rather, I found everything and nothing. At once, navigational data in a kind of quantum indeterminacy that refused to resolve. On the 23rd day, by the ship's chronometer, though I personally experienced it as the 47th, while my assistant swore it was the 9th. The Geller field began to flicker more often. The fluctuations were brief, microseconds at most, but they increased in frequency. Each time the field wavered, the ship's reality wavered with it. Color shifted into spectrums that eyes were not meant to hold. Sounds became tactile. The smell of chapel incense sometimes arrived before it was ever lit. Servitors froze mid-motion, their programming unable to reconcile contradictory sensory inputs and requiring manual resets by tech priests, who themselves were struggling to hold coherent thought. I reported this to Captain Helix with the gravity it deserved. The Geller field isn't failing technically, I said. Generators are within parameters. But the field defines a bubble of normalcy in a region that has no consistent state to maintain. It cannot create what does not exist. What does that mean? He asked. It means the boundary between us and the warp is becoming theoretical rather than absolute. We're still screened from direct incursion, but the line between inside and outside is blurring. The ship may start to exhibit dimensional instability. As if on cue, the deck beneath my feet rippled like water, not violently, but unmistakably. Metal flowed in a wave from bow to stern, and then resolved back into steel. The sensation was not motion sickness. It was the gut-level wrongness of matter behaving incorrectly. For the first time I heard fear in the captain's voice when he whispered, "Throne, preserve us." Dimensional instabilities began small and accelerated. Corridors lengthened and contracted in jerks, as if space itself had trouble keeping. A measurement. A passage meant to be 20 meters extended to 100, then snapped back to 10, then settled. Several ratings were so disoriented they required sedation. One guard was caught in a corridor when it contracted. He survived, but was gravely injured in ways our manuals did not contemplate. Medics did what they could. The injuries were outside. Precedent .ship geometry lied. Doors opened onto rooms that could not fit inside the space assigned to them. A locker might contain an expanse larger than the deck it sat on. Mapping servitors became useless. Their programs could not reconcile. Corridors connecting in ways that violated basic topology. Crew members reported walking in straight lines and finding themselves behind where they started. I remained in my navigation blister, unwilling to leave for fear I would not find my way back. My space was small and cramped, lined with instruments, and wards that kept my third eye from drawing unwanted attention. Here, at least, reality held more firmly than it did elsewhere. I could still think in straight lines, but even there, I was not entirely safe. I began to see things at the edges of my vision, not demons, not obvious entities, but fragments of the ship itself, echoes and repetitions. I'd look at an instrument and, for a breath, see it from angles that should not exist, as if I were observing the same space from multiple perspectives at once. Once I saw myself working at the console from behind. When I turned, there was only the blister wall. The memory remained with perfect clarity, but reality denied it had ever happened. The crew's minds frayed along with the ship's fabric. Daily services became fractured affairs. Different sections of the crew heard different words from the captain's vox, or the same phrase repeated into what felt like infinity. Some stopped coming to worship because they reported experiencing the whole ceremony in an instant, all the words arriving at once and crushing their ability to find meaning. Others felt the service stretch for days, the captain droning on until repetition nearly unmanned them. Small disagreements grew into violent arguments over details that could not be reconciled. 2 tech priests came to blows arguing whether a rite had been performed. Each was absolutely certain. In that place, I suspected both were true from their separate frames. Captain Helix tightened order. He imposed curfews, a strange thing to demand when time itself was unreliable, increased patrols, and punished infractions publicly to try to build something absolute the crew could hold to. Whether that brought unity or fear was impossible to say, and I could understand his intent. When the laws of nature unraveled, he turned to the laws of the Navy as an anchor. I stayed at my blister and kept opening to the Imperium, searching for anything that might be a way home. Slowly a pattern emerged. The warp around us was not pure chaos. It had a grammar. Subtle, complex motifs repeated. It felt as if the Imperium was arranging itself in response to our presence, not merely reacting, but anticipating. Currents would form eddies and channels that matched the cathedral's movements before we made them. When I ordered minor course changes, the surrounding space shifted to accommodate, or sometimes to obstruct us. Once you began to look for it, the evidence was undeniable. The warp was learning us. When I told the captain, his composure cracked. Is there an intelligence directing this? A demon? He demanded. I don't think so, I said. If it were a demon, we would see possession, corruption, direct psychic assault. This is different. The Imperium is the realm of thought and feeling made manifest. Our fear, our hope, our confusion, they're bleeding into it. It is reflecting us back. How do we escape our own reflection? He asked. I had no answer. Truth clarified in the days that followed. The cathedral was no longer merely a ship adrift in the warp. She was being remade by it. Machine spirits began to behave oddly. Servos that anticipated orders, systems that activated before a need was voiced. Plasma drives hummed prayers, not in any sacred register we kept. I heard one of those hymns once over the vox, not Gothic, not lingua technis, not any recorded canticle. The sound bypassed language, and landed in the mind with meaning. Hunger. Patience, the slow pleasure of consumption, spread across an eternity. It promised peace through dissolution. Tech priests performed purges and rites with desperate fervor. Incense, chants, the sacred oils, but the cleansings never felt complete. The ship had been touched in a way the rituals could not entirely scrub. Corridors that had shifted began to settle into new shapes that made no engineering sense. Support struts linked where there should have been bulkheads. New rooms appeared. Where sensors had once read only void, crews learned to navigate by memory of landmarks rather than maps that no longer matched reality. One investigation found a chamber the size of a cathedral where none should have been. Statues lined the walls, weeping figures whose faces seemed to change when observed indirectly. The chamber could not logically fit, and yet it was solid, undeniably present and wrong. The captain ordered it sealed. More such places appeared. I realized the cathedral was being rewritten by the Imperium, shaped by our collective dreams and nightmares. Every fear, every prayer, every private hope was being absorbed and re-etched into the ship's substance. We were not just inside the warp, we were becoming part of it. If that continued, would we remain a ship? Would we remain human? Would our boundaries dissolve into some composite consciousness that remembered individuality but could no longer sustain it? I tried to explain this to Captain Helix. He answered with faith, "We are servants of the Emperor. We are protected by his will." I said bluntly that the warp did not care for belief. It was indifferent, beyond judgment. It simply was, and it was changing us, whether we consented or not. For a moment his hand went to his sidearm. I thought he might brand me a heretic. Instead he said quietly, "Then we hold to duty and discipline. We will not surrender to despair. We will keep searching." I said yes, because what else was there to say? But I knew, from decades reading the warp's moods, that faith and order alone would not be enough. We were drowning in unreality, and every struggle dragged us deeper. The toll on minds grew unbearable. 3 crew members died in a single day under unsettling circumstances. One vanished from a corridor and was later found somewhere he could not have reached. Another was discovered dead in his quarters. A third was gone, leaving only the question of how anyone could disappear aboard a sealed ship. The deaths were mourned, recorded, and quietly investigated, but there were no answers that made sense. Grief and dread settled heavier than any prayer. We kept working. We kept praying. And the cathedral kept changing, patient as a thing that has all the time in the world. When the first body was cut down, it did not lie there in the way death is meant to lie. By the time we reached him, his remains had the appearance of advanced decay, as if time had passed over him in ways our chronometers could not account for. The second was found in his quarters, gone as if he had simply ceased to be. The third walked into the primary plasma reactor and was instantly gone. Yet several crew members continued to report seeing her in the corridors for weeks afterward, an echo of motion, a fragment of memory that would not accept finality. Those losses hit morale harder than the bending decks or the time slips. Death should be a line you can draw. Here even that line blurred. Captain Helix ordered tighter surveillance and mandated daily psychological checks, but the medics themselves were fraying. How do you measure sanity when the baseline of reality keeps moving? From my blister, I watched the cathedral descend into a functional madness. The crew kept working because duty had become the only anchor. They cleaned corridors that rearranged overnight, maintained systems that obeyed different rules depending on who watched them, stood posts that moved while they turned away. Their determination was either the noblest kind of will or the most dangerous delusion. I admired them from afar and felt my isolation keenly. I was alone with instruments and wards and an eye that never closed, watching the warp coil and uncoil. Like a patient predator out in most voyages, vigilance keeps you alive. Here the Imperium did not need an opening. It was already threaded through the ship, whispering in our machine spirits and reflecting our fears back as shape and sound. I had to hold my focus not only to plot a course, but to keep some sense of myself from dissolving into the same pattern. On what my chronometer recorded, as the 48th day, I saw the thing we had become. While charting the currents I perceived. Another vessel moving through the chaos. At first a wavering impression, then a perfect image. It was our ship. 3 kilometers of dictator-class hull, every detail precise. The Cathedral of Iron. And then I understood that we were looking. At ourselves mirrored back dot, this duplicate was not a simple illusion. It was a construct, born from the Imperium, a predatory echo shaped from our collective presence. It angled toward us with intent. I warned the captain, "There is a ship approaching. It looks like us." My words sounded small over the vox. "Explain," he said. "The warp has generated a copy of our vessel," I said. "It mimics our hull markings and armor. I believe it is the thing I have been sensing. It's not separate from us. It's made from us. I don't know if it's hostile, but it is approaching with purpose." We altered course, engines groaning, and the duplicate shifted with us as if joined by the same mind. It anticipated every change. We could not outmaneuver our reflection. When it came alongside, it revealed its difference. The form was perfect, but wrong. A copy that had missed the thing that made the cathedral a ship in purpose, not just shape. Then it struck, not with physical shells, but with waves of unreality that passed through the Geller field and landed inside our decks. Areas struck by those waves ceased to obey consistent rules. Gravity stuttered and reversed. Time splintered into parallel possibilities. Sections of the vessel experienced multiple outcomes at once. Some crew members aged, others regressed, some vanished, others existed in overlapping versions of the same moment. Through the internal sensors, I watched a whole engineering section live every possible fate at once. The machine spirits screamed in code and litany, not from pain, but from the shock of not knowing what they were. The lights shifted through spectra that hurt to look at. The air tasted of copper and something like old fruit. We returned fire, because that is what you do, but our weapons dissolved in the space between holes. The duplicate simply absorbed. The gestures and answered with more unreality. From my blister, I could see both ships and, for the first time, I understood in cold detail. The Phantom was not an external enemy so much as a growth of our own psychic presence. It fed on and reproduced what we were. It was killing us by replicating us into an incoherent multitude. A terrible idea formed in my mind, not a plan born of hope, but a hypothesis edged with dread. If the Phantom was us, then perhaps it could be shown itself in a way that made its pattern visible, forced to confront the very thing that birthed it. It was dangerous, likely impossible, and perhaps monstrous to even consider. Still, the thought would not leave me. The suicides hit us in a way the anomalies never had. One rating walked away and never returned. When his body was finally found, it was strangely aged, not the clean end we expect, but a ruin that made us feel as if time had already passed over him. Another simply disappeared from his quarters. A third walked into the primary plasma reactor and was killed instantly. Even after their deaths, crew members reported seeing them in the corridors for weeks. Echoes of motion, fragments of consciousness that could not accept finality. Those losses hollowed the ship more than any warped corridor or fractured hour. Death should close the story. Here it was unruly and unfinished. Captain Helix ordered tighter surveillance and daily psychological evaluations, but the medics themselves were fraying. How do you measure sanity when the definition of normal keeps shifting? From my blister, I watched the cathedral slip into a kind of functional madness. The crew held to duty because duty was the only stable thing left. They scrubbed corridors that rearranged overnight, tuned systems that obeyed different rules depending on who watched them, and stood posts that moved while they turned their heads. Their determination was either the purest expression of human will or the most dangerous delusion. I admired them from a distance and felt the isolation of having only my instruments and a third eye that would not close. Normally, constant vigilance preserves a navigator. Here, vigilance was a small comfort against a reality that had already come inside the ship, whispering in machine spirits, returning our fears to us as shape and sound. I needed to hold my focus not only to plot a course, but to keep some part of myself intact against the slow erosion of identity. On what my chronometer read as the 48th day, I saw the thing we had become. While charting the currents, I perceived another vessel in the Imperium. At first an uncertain shimmer, then a perfect, horrifying copy. Our own 3-kilometer silhouette, every hull plate and marking precise. The Cathedral of Iron, and a mirror of us born in the warp dot. This phantom was more than an image. It was a construct grown from our presence, a predatory echo shaped by our collective consciousness. It steered toward us with intent. I warned the captain. Another ship is approaching. It is our ship. We alter course, he ordered. We tried. The duplicate matched us, anticipating each change, learning from us because it was made of us. We could not outmaneuver our own reflection. When it came alongside, the copy's perfection felt wrong, form without the purpose that makes a ship. Then it struck, not with metal, but with unreality. Its attacks bypassed our Geller field and manifested inside decks, zones where gravity fractured, where time split into overlapping streams, where people experienced countless versions of events at once. In one strike, an engineering section seemed to live every possible outcome simultaneously. Some aged, some regressed, some simply ceased to be. Machine spirits screamed in code and liturgy as if begging to be recognized. Our weapons, meant for real space combat, evaporated uselessly against the duplicate's assault. From my protected blister, I could see both vessels and understood with cold clarity. The Phantom was not an independent foe, but a malign growth of our own psychic presence, replicating us until coherence unraveled. It was killing us by multiplying our contradictions. Desperate, I formed a hypothesis. If the Phantom was born from our collective mind, perhaps that same mind could affect it. If I reached into the warp, not merely to read it, but to shape it, to become a deliberate force in psychic space, I might force a change. The cost would be everything. Dropping all psychic defenses and pouring my consciousness into such an act would leave me exposed to every horror in the Imperium. To unmake a ship-sized construct would demand the full measure of my mind. I would not expect to survive. I told Captain Helix in private and explained the plan. I would open myself, merge my awareness with the Phantom, and try to deny it the coherent identity it needed to hold together. The risk was total psychic feedback. Will it work? He asked. Maybe, I said honestly. Doing nothing will certainly destroy us. You have my authorization, he said. The Emperor protects, he intoned, and I repeated the phrase. More as ritual than comfort, I sealed my blister and dismissed my assistant. I spoke a last prayer to mark the moment, then opened my third eye, shedding the shields I had spent decades building. The contact was immediate and burning, not physical. Pain, but the sensation of a mind forced to process infinity. The warp poured into me, sensation without owner, emotion without source. I felt hungers and tendernesses that belonged to no human heart, laughter that was not joy, grief that had weight like stone. I drove my awareness toward the phantom cathedral and found it like a cancer in perception. Our shape without our purpose. I pushed into its core and began to deny it coherent form, attacking its conceptual pillars, refusing its claim to being, insisting it was an error that could not persist. The construct resisted, using the same psychic material that birthed it. To defend itself, we grappled in a realm beyond space, two concepts of reality clashing. I was breaking apart under the strain, but I had one edge: willingness to die. The phantom clung to existence with the ferocity of something born from fear. That desire was its flaw. I fed it hope and then withdrew it, creating doubt. Bit by agonizing bit, the duplicate lost cohesion. Its perfect mimicry frayed into approximation, and then into formless chaos. Its assaults faded as it lost the structure to project organized force. When the phantom collapsed, the psychic energy that had formed, it rushed back along the bond I had forged. A tsunami of unstructured warp force slammed into my exposed consciousness. My mind shattered like glass. Pieces of thought fragmented and scattered. My last clear thought was a small prayer that the cathedral would survive. Then there was a vast, indescribable silence. According to the ship's logs, my body remained alive in the blister for 7 hours, breathing and unresponsive. The phantom vanished from all sensors. Captain Helix ordered emergency rites of mental restoration, but the psychers reported my consciousness shattered beyond normal recovery, scattered in the immaterium. Like ashes dot, what I remember afterward is a slow, painful reassembly. It was not waking so much as piecing together perception from drifting fragments. At first I had no body, just awareness and shards of memory. Gradually those pieces coalesced. My name, the ship, the act I had made. When I finally opened my eyes, I was restrained in the medic ward, monitors everywhere, medics whispering about vitals and neural shock. While I lay catatonic, Captain Helix had seen an opening in the warp currents created by the phantom's collapse. A thin place where the boundary between immaterium and real space thinned. He ordered the ship to push for it. The Cathedral of Iron, damaged and remade by what we had endured, forced itself through and into real space. We escaped, but the cost was profound. When we emerged, the chronometers and charts told a story that made the crew's relief taste of ash. The ship's record showed 6 months had passed under ship time. When we scanned the sky, we found we had returned 940 years forward and some 3,000 light years from our intended destination. The Cadian gate we had aimed for had fallen centuries before. The galaxy we returned to was unfamiliar, reshaped by centuries we had not lived. We had survived the warp. That was small comfort against the knowledge that survival had come at a price none of us could fully name. When we finally forced our way back into real space, the cost became plain. Of the 12,000 souls who boarded the Cathedral of Iron, fewer than 3,000 emerged with minds intact. Many had been killed by time's fractures, broken by the ship's warped geometry, or simply lost where reality no longer held. Together, bodies were found scattered through the decks in states that made no simple sense, some apparently recently dead, others showing signs of aging far beyond explanation, and others in conditions our medics could not readily classify. Cathedral herself bore those wounds. Entire sections remained unstable, corridors and rooms that still flickered between configurations, spaces that were inexplicably larger inside than they should have been. The tech priests declared whole wards off limits, sealing them behind blessed bulkheads and warning sigils. Machine spirits that once served predictably now answered in ways that were unsettling and unreliable. Captain Helix survived, but he was not the same man who had first ordered the run. Subjective months had left decades on his face. His hair had gone white, and his hands shook at times. His faith remained, but it had hardened into something desperate and spare, the faith of a man who had seen how thin reality could be and chose order anyway. As for me, I recovered to consciousness, but never returned whole. Exposure to raw warp had changed me. The immaterium was louder in my head. Things I could once ignore pressed at the edge of my perception. Tech priests fitted psychic dampeners and prescribed medicines that dulled some of the noise, but nothing removed it entirely. I was relieved of navigator duty with honors. The Imperium commended me and granted pensions that meant very little to a man who sometimes could not recall his own name. I was put to lighter tasks, cataloging charts, teaching novices the basics of shielding. It kept me steady enough to continue. The cathedral remained in service for decades after we returned. She was rebuilt and reconsecrated. Tainted sections were excised and remade. Even so, later crews reported uncanny things. Voices in dead tongues, shadows that moved against an angle of light, runes that appeared only to certain people at certain times. The ship remembered what had been done to her, and memory in the Imperium has weight. Eventually, she was retired and converted into a reliquary vessel, a shrine to the lost. Orbiting a shrine world is a monument to sacrifice and to the price of being lost. I think of that voyage often, especially when medication's thin and the immaterium presses close. I think of those who died in ways that made no sense, lives stretched into subjective eternities or compressed into instants, and of the phantom, cathedral that rose from our fear and was undone by what I did. I think of Captain Helix and the hard faith that kept the crew functioning when reality was failing. Mostly I think about what it means to be lost, not merely being off course, but being in a place where reference points vanish, where every map becomes useless and identity grows provisional. We brought something back with us, a shadow of unreality that clings to those who survived. We remember events that did not happen alongside those that did. Our memories are as fractured as the ship's geometry was in the warp. The records the Adeptus keeps are tidy. Tactical reports, casualty figures, dates. They do not capture the quieter horrors, the dissolution of meaning, the way the warp reshapes what it touches. The warp is not a moral place. It has no rules we can trust. It is where stories multiply until none of them are true. To be lost, there is to be lost from the narrative itself. I survived. I do not call it a mercy. I am the product of exposure, altered, diminished, carrying the warp inside my perception. I record this account because the sanitized reports are insufficient. If you travel the lanes, if you feel the currents shift, remember the Cathedral of Iron. Remember what it does to those who stray. Remember that being lost is not simple, and that some ships return only in form while their souls remain scattered. In a screaming void, I am Navigator Voss. I have told you the truth of the Cathedral of Iron. Remember it when you set your course through the immaterium, and pray you never know what it means to be lost.